Hello there. Welcome back to Nick and Mel's Hyperspace. This is Nick here. Wanted to introduce this episode today and give an update on the future of our podcast. So today's episode is going to be from a recording from Chattanooga Comic-Con last September, where I got to moderate a panel for Alex Segura. For those of you that don't know, Alex is the current writer for the Marvel Star Wars comic series. So I got to interview him and discuss what his process was of writing Star Wars comics, how he got into the industry, and all that good stuff, and just got to know Alex a little bit. Extremely nice guy. Was really fun. Small panel. I've done a couple panels at Dragon Con, and the last few years at Chattanooga Comic-Con, I've been like the guy that does the Star Wars panels. It's ran by my local comic book store, Epico's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they're a really wonderful group, and I appreciate them for giving me the opportunity. So if you're in the Chattanooga area, definitely recommend stopping by. They're a great store. For the podcast, I wanted to just upload it and share it. You know, I'm the big comics guy here on the podcast, so I wanted to share that. I did one last year with Charles Soule and Mark Bandaren, and I did not get to record that one, unfortunately, so we recorded this year with Alex. It's not the complete panel, but we got a good chunk of it, and we got, I think, the highlights of it. So hope you guys enjoy that, and will, check out Alex's work with the Star Wars Marvel series. So as for the future of our podcast, Carmelo and I are currently working on this new season, and going forward, this will be the last season of Nick and Melo's Hyperspace. What that means is we're going to be rebranding sometime in the next year or so. Don't know exactly what that looks like yet, still working at the details. But part of the rebranding is Carmelo is going to be taking a step back from the podcast. Won't really be doing it as often. He will still occasionally be helping me with it, but it's going to be more my project now. So I'm going to be taking over. So I'm going to rebrand the name and come up with some new ideas and try some new things with the podcast. Just because I wanted to keep it going. Carmelo's at a different stage in his life and wanted to step away and do other things. So I totally understand his reasoning. I appreciate all his work, everything he's done for this podcast. But of course, he'll be back in some capacities and talk about some things. And we have a lot of fun episodes planned for this year. And a lot of the ones that we've been wanting to do since we started this podcast are finally coming to fruition. So I'm glad that we're getting to do those, and I'm really excited for you guys to check those out. So keep up with us over the next, say, year or so. So by the end of 26, we're hoping to be completely done with Nick and Mel's Hyperspace and launch something different. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we'll keep you updated as we release episodes. So thank you guys for supporting our podcast over the years. And it's going to continue in some capacity, I promise. Be sure to like us on YouTube, subscribe, follow on Spotify, share with your friends and family that love Star Wars. And my love of Star Wars is not dying. And there's a lot of great Star Wars stuff coming next year that we're so excited to talk about. And I think that's why Carmelo wanted to stay on for at least one more year to touch on all the cool stuff that's coming. So again, thank you all, and I hope you enjoy this interview and panel I did with Alex Segura.
Alrighty, welcome everybody. My name's Nick. We're going to be talking about Star Wars, and specifically Star Wars comics, because we have with us the current writer of Star Wars comics, Alex Segura. Just a little background on me. I'm born and raised in North Georgia, so from the Chattanooga area. Run a Star Wars YouTube channel and podcast where I'm talking all things Star Wars. And comic books are like one of my favorite things ever. So when I found out Alex was going to be here, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk to him about his experience writing comics, and then specifically how he got into Star Wars comics. So I'll let Alex introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Alex Segura. I'm the writer of the current ongoing Star Wars book for Marvel. I wrote Star Wars Battle of Jakku before that, and a one-shot right before that. I've also written a Star Wars novel, Poe Dameron Freefall, which is basically Poe's origin leading up to the prequel, the new trilogy. And I also wrote a short story in the Jedi and Sith YA and middle grade anthology. I got to write a Qui-Gon story, which is fun.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you've been all over Star Wars.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, we were just talking, there's an age gap between us, so what is your first experience with Star Wars?
Yeah, I think it was very similar to what you shared in terms of like a visual memory. I remember just seeing Darth Vader. I think it was either a commercial or a TV clip. I think, I was born in '80, so I was right in the thick of it. And I remember having the action figures as a kid. And then I think a lot of people forget that there was a huge gap of time between Jedi and the prequels, where there was Star Wars content, books, obviously great novels and great games, but no mainline films or TV series. And so when Phantom Menace came out, it was a huge pop culture moment. I remember waiting outside of that theater on opening night and just being so thrilled to hear the music and see the scroll. So those are like kind of the seismic memories for me for Star Wars.
Nice. So let me ask, I know you're a writer, so what got you into writing and how did that journey start for you?
I've always been a voracious reader. I think as a writer, you should continue to be a reader. Like reading is what's going to guide you and guide your skill set. So I think I was writing, even though I didn't know it was writing yet, like kind of writing little stories or drawing my own little comic books as a kid. And then in college, I was an English lit major, so I was very, I was a reader, so I loved reading, but I was also a newspaper writer, and then I think working in newspapers really gave me a sense of deadlines and making each word count. And so I thought, I'll be a journalist, and the creative writing maybe I'll do on the side, and someday it'll turn into something. But I was able to blend my love of journalism and comics, and I started working for places like Newsarama and Wizard Magazine, and that really opened the door to the industry and kind of networking and meeting people. But I still wasn't writing my own stories yet. It wasn't until I started working at DC Comics in the publicity department, and really I was in the machine. So I got to meet all the talent, and I got to, what a great opportunity. I did my job, which was to be a publicist, but it was also a great way to see how someone like Greg Rucka handles himself, or what does a Greg Rucka script look like? What does a Grant Morrison script look like? Gail Simone, what is she like as a writer? And then seeing the machinery of how comics are made. So around that time, I started writing my first novel, mostly because once your hobbies become your job, it changes the tonality. So I would get a stack of all the DC books coming out that week, which is amazing, but it was also my job to kind of pour through them and say, oh, this is a publicity opportunity, or we should preview this somewhere. So it was work. And so then my other hobby, which was reading mystery novels, I was like, let me try and do that for fun. And I always joke around that I have this bad habit of turning my hobbies into careers, and so my book got published, and I moved to Archie, and Archie was a little more flexible about people on staff writing, so I got to write. I grew up on Archie. Archie was my first comic book, and so I had the same kind of passion for those characters that I think people do for like Batman. I just grew up on them, and so I wrote some stuff for Archie, and then my novel stuff picked up momentum, and kind of went from there. Sorry, you didn't ask me for like a detailed one.
No, I appreciate the extensive history. So, yes, you were already kind of working in the industry, like for DC and being a publicist, but so how long were you at DC, and do you have any DC work that people might have heard of? Or
yeah, I worked at DC, I had 2 stints. I worked there as a publicity manager for about 5 years, and then I came back after Archie for a little while, for a couple of years, and then I went back. So it was kind of like a ping pong for a little bit. In terms of creative stuff, I'm probably most known for writing The Question All Along the Watchtower, which is a 6-issue miniseries focusing on Renee Montoya as the head of security of the Justice League Watchtower. It's tying into the Mark Waid, Dan Mora, Justice League Unlimited stuff. It's funny because I finished the series, it got greenlit, and my editor, Paul Kaminsky, who's an old friend, was like, we're going to have to build a team around Renee, of heroes, like, who would you want it to be? And I submitted the list thinking there was no way they were going to let me have these characters. Batwoman was an obvious one because they have a history, and it's nice to see their dynamic and how it's grown. But I suggested Animal Man, the 2 Blue Beetles, Ted and Jaime, Nightshade, and I had a bunch of other cameos. So I was like, there's just no way they're going to go for it. It's just a little too much of a deep cut. I'm literally repeating a character in the Blue Beetle, but they went for it. And it was really fun because it was my wish list. It was like the characters that I had dreamed of writing. And so I got to write the Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and all those characters in that series, plus other obscure characters like the Bulleteer. And you see the Heckler, I think, for a panel, so that was fun.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And Star Wars is no stranger to obscure characters.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Right up your alley there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, so what was your first Star Wars work, and how did you get into that?
My first Star Wars work was the Poe Dameron novel. I had written 5 Private Eye books set in Miami, my hometown, and I'd written some comic book stuff, and Mike Siglain, the head of editorial at Lucasfilm, reached out, and it was funny because the email was so vague, it was kind of like, would you ever want to do something with Star Wars? And that was it. It was like one sentence, and I was like, okay, I gotta wait at least 10 minutes to respond. Professional adult. And I did respond. I said, yes, I'd love to, not knowing what it meant and whatever I was up for, whatever. And then we went back and forth, and he explained what they wanted, and this was right before, Rise of Skywalker came out. So they kind of had an idea of what the story was going to be, but they really wanted to connect the dots between what was revealed in the film and Poe's narrative. And so I thought that was really fertile territory to show Poe's origin story, to give a little more context on Zori Bliss and her background and her story. And it's still a pinch me moment to this day, having done a decent amount of Star Wars stuff by now, to add to the mythos. Creating Zori Bliss's mom, her backstory, explaining why Poe became a spice runner, because I think there was an initial, I think people bristled at the idea, like, why would Poe become a villain? And my answer is like, there's a story there, and this is the story. And if you read this, it explains it to you, I think, pretty clearly, and Poe is consistent. And it's a much younger version of Poe. It's a Poe that is not established, hasn't fully come to terms with where his life is headed, and that's, I think, super relatable, and that's really what YA is about. It's about those big emotional highs, and so that was a blast, and that was really what a great way to start, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting way to get into it too, just to read the meaning. So those connections paid off for you. So is there, after that, where did we go from there? Did you have to wait a while? Did they novel get well received? Did there people do more? Or?
Yeah, I think it was well received. It seemed like people were happy with Poe's origin story, and I was happy with having just added to that world. And then I went back to, I was writing other mystery novels like Secret Identity, which is a murder mystery set in comics, and that won the LA Times Book Prize. And I kept my kind of foot in comics as well, working in comics, and so Marvel reached out about doing an anniversary Return of the Jedi one-shot, and that was cool because I got to play with some of the characters I created in the Poe book, like some of the Spice Runners, like the Gilch and that crew, and then that was cool, and I thought, okay, that's it for now, but then I guess it was competent enough that they reached out, Mark Nietzsche reached out and was like, hey, we've got this Battle of Jakku maxi series, like 12 issues, like, would you be up for that? I said, I'd love to do that. But I think the challenge with something like Battle of Jakku, which is in stark contrast to what we're doing with the ongoing, is that there's so much established canon in that period. Like from Return of the Jedi to Battle of Jakku, you have the Aftermath books, you have other novels, other games. And so it was really, I think sometimes comics can become very puzzle piecey, like you're putting things together and hoping it becomes a story, and my concern was like, let's make sure it has a beginning, middle, end, a compelling villain, and on its own feels like a cool story. Like you don't feel like you have a reading list you have to dive into to just understand what went on. So that was the big challenge, and finding a villain in the lore that with a little kind of tweak or a little more spotlight could feel like a viable threat, especially in the wake of the fall of the Empire and people's denial of that having happened. I think it doesn't spoil too much, it's been out for a little while. Adelhard is adamant that the Empire will not fall. Like, he basically tells people that he will assassinate them if they start saying that, Vader and the Emperor are dead. And he basically creates this satellite region that is going to continue being the Empire. And that felt compelling to me, and felt like I'm always into like the geopolitical stuff. I think that's really fascinating. And then also adding more characters to the lore, like Reyna Oscar, who I like a lot. I like the kind of devious female vampire character. I think she's cool, and then other characters like Rin Zanat and Kid Alicia, like just I think you always want to leave the twins in better shape than when you got them. So you don't want to write the established characters out of character. You want them to feel like they're themselves, but you also know what's coming. So to create conflict and tension, you have to integrate new characters and have them also at risk.
Yeah. That's I guess what I was going to ask you is how is Star Wars different than like DC? Because we know Star Wars, the movies, the books, the comics, the TV shows all connect.
Yeah.
It's all one linear story, whereas DC, the new Superman movie has nothing to do with what's going on in the comics.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. Yeah. Sorry.
I was just saying, how is that a challenge? For you, kind of fit your story into what's already been told.
I mean, that is the challenge. The challenge is there is so much lore, whereas, like you said, DC or Marvel, the MCU is its own cinematic universe. It's apart from the comics. Though sometimes I wonder, like, what would happen if they did comics just set in the MCU? Would that draw more people in? Maybe. The challenge is there's just so much content, and I'm like the 1 billionth writer to add to the mythos. So like I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I go into the encyclopedia, I'm like, oh, it's been done 5 times. So it's like not only having a good idea, but finding the right character for that idea and something that doesn't contradict what's coming. Like there's literal encyclopedias that tell you what happened every year, what planets were, what everything that's going on. And so it's finding that space, that breathing room for not only something to happen, but for that thing to be part of a bigger story. And so when I was talking to the editors about Battle of Jakku, I said, I want this to feel like there was a fourth movie. Like there was a fourth movie to that original trilogy. And I don't mean that as a hubristic thing, like it's not ego, it's just like, I want it to just feel epic, like it matters. And so that was the challenge going in. Whether we accomplished it or not is up to the readers to decide, but we tried to make it feel big and sweeping. And the challenge then comes, like you go through all this stuff, all this material, and you're like, is there room for that kind of story there? Because it's a really tight era, in terms of events.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so when you were maybe come to you about this story, how much leeway or say did you get? Did one of the characters say like, no, you can't use them, or we can't do that, or did you? How was the creative process like when you're coming up with all these different stories?
I think that unlike other situations, like if it's creator owned, look, I just can make it up. There's nothing there. I think there's more steps in the approval process. So it's like, what's your basic idea, like a paragraph or two, then outline the issues by issue, and then show the arc, like what characters are you going to introduce. These characters are literally off the board because they're somewhere else. Like, Chewbacca's somewhere else, so I couldn't use them as much as I wanted to because, that's the first thing people notice. Like, well, this person's showing up, and according to this, or because of this episode or this other novel, they're elsewhere. And so mistakes will always be made. Like we're all human, fallible people. That you can't know everything. And so I'm sure there's moments where there's like some inconsistencies, and I think particularly in the end, it gets really hard because there's so many different things happening at once. And of course, I could have to end with the Battle of Jakku. So I knew where we were going. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, now I saw an issue that's going to come out next week, and then we'll start scripting an issue that's supposed to come out 2 months later, and then plotting the finale. And so I think my brain works well with that, but I can't say it was not stressful. And so towards the end of it, I remember talking to Mark and Mikey Basso, Star Wars editors, and I said, look, just let me know what you want me to tee up for the next person. Because I figured I'm the steward, I'm doing this Jakku book, and then, well, it's funny you asked that, because we want you to do it. And that was really a cool moment and really exciting. And so then I got to thinking, what can I set up for myself? Like, what are the moments? And there's a key moment that you won't see play out yet in the main series, but you'll see at least the first 10 issues between two characters that will start affecting one of them in the main series. So I also didn't want the ongoing to feel like Battle of Jakku too, Jakku, because Battle of Jakku is such a dense, political, so many moving pieces, and I wanted to kind of hit the open space with the new series, like have it feel fresh and new, but familiar. Like you see a lot of elements that are familiar, like stormtroopers and things like that, but tweaked in a way like this is a new era. And Phil Note was trying, so it's beautiful. Yeah, I could give him a dictionary. It was very interesting.
So yeah, I was going to ask about the art process. Is that something you get to choose, or is that something like Marvel's like, hey, here's doing the art for your comic art?
Yeah, it's not something where I get to choose. I think it's more Marvel will say, hey, and how can I say no? Like Battle of Jakku, it's like we have Leonard Kirk, we have Stefano Raphael, we have Jeff Morales, Luke Ross did some stuff too. That's awesome. Leonard Kirk is an artist I've been following since he was doing Supergirl at DC. I've loved his stuff. He's got a very great, almost Stuart Immonen-ish style, very dynamic. First issue because it kind of sets the tone out of the game. Like this is going to be not just a response to what came before, but it's a whole new story. And Stefano is fantastic. Jethro is a great action artist. Yeah, oftentimes it's Marvel saying this is the artist, but I don't need to diminish that. They obviously put a lot of time and thought into that. I wasn't going to say, that's a fair. That was like the best case scenario.
So you are working, like you're saying, you had a lot of moving parts, plotting points in one series, writing script for the next one. What's the communication like with the others? How does that work? I imagine you guys aren't all sitting in the same room.
We're not. Yeah, that would be cool to work in a full-time type scenario. Usually Marvel's great about having everyone on email, so when stuff comes in, you see the stuff and you can give notes. I like to cheer people on. I think we're all working in solitary, doing different things and kind of in our own heads, and so I'll send the note to the artist and be like, it's great. I always especially someone like Leonard, who I've been following as a fan, I emailed him, it's just an honor. Phil is one of my oldest friends in comics, and I remember working at Blizzard. He was one of the first brains I met. And so it feels like we've kind of been working in this industry and finally we get a chance to work together. So that's been wild. But in terms of notes, there's a lot of systematic structural things and opportunities to give feedback. So I feel pretty secure that nothing would be missed.
So obviously, we don't want to go too far into spoilers for your new series. What is it like? You said you grew up with the original trilogy. What is it like writing Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia and Han Solo? I was little, I was feeling about all that.
Pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's amazing. You just want to honor that tone. I was on a panel yesterday about writing, and one of the things with dialogue is you want to make each character sound different. And Luke has a way of saying something that is different from how Han says it and how Leia says it. The big question I ask myself is, what are each of these three characters struggling with, and what characters can we use to contrast what they're struggling with, or put more of a spotlight? So it's pretty easy to figure out, like Leia and Mon Mothma are kind of a duo. The political narrative is their story. Han and Balance are the underworld of the smuggler world, and Valance is not. Han has kind of come to the side of light fully. Like he's like, I'm in it with the New Republic. Valance is a reminder of what he was before. I think that's an interesting contrast. And for Luke, it's Rinzana, who's a new character that was introduced in Battle of Jakku. And she has a lot of parallels to where Luke started. She's a wide-eyed pilot with a conflicted, mysterious past. And she kind of reminds him of where he came from. Before all the Jedi stuff, before he discovered what his legacy was, he was just this kid that loved to fly. And there's a lot of connection there. And so those characters exist in many ways to help define the main characters, but also you can do a little more with those characters because we're not fully sure where they end up. So there's a little more suspense about them.
Yeah, is that a challenge, like you said, we know where a lot of these characters end up? Have you got pushback or any thing that you've wanted to do with some of those characters, or things that you were hoping to do that?
I think it's a question that I know fans are always curious about, like what could have been. But I think Marvel and Lucasfilm and the Star Wars crew are open to new interpretations, but there's also established canon. Like, we know Luke's going to show up in The Mandalorian, and then we know what happens in the next trilogy. So there's still a lot of space. And I think as a writer who focuses on character, there's a lot of character growth I can show. So my run on the series doesn't stretch out in terms of like years and years of the timeline. We're seeing a very urgent moment early on. And so I think it's interesting to plant seeds for what we're going to see down the line, like Luke's quest to become more knowledgeable about the Jedi and the Jedi lore and his past and what, for this new era. And Han, I mean, he's a dad, he's a new dad. He's grappling with his own struggles, like what's my place in this new republic and how can I define it and be of use. One of my favorite arcs is Leia, because her big thing is we won the war. We wanted to do this differently. So let's stick to our kind of idealistic goals and not just become the Empire 2.0. Let's try and do this the right way. And that obviously plays out, much later, and we see the struggle there. But it's been really cool to plant those seeds and show how they'll get there.
That's awesome. So, as we're looking forward to more issues from you, but is there anything in Star Wars right now that I know you got your hands full with things that you're writing, but is there things that maybe you've wanted to do with Star Wars that you haven't got to do, or anything that you're hoping to do one day with Star Wars?
I would love to. I wrote a Qui-Gon short story, which is a lot of fun. I'd love to write an Obi-Wan story. I like Obi-Wan a lot. It's probably my favorite Star Wars character. Yeah, and it's just been fun to write. It's like a movie. I got to write a Star Wars movie. Once, Battle of Jakku reads well as a trade. Not that I sat and read my own work, but I think it looks good as that one volume. It feels like a very important moment. Yeah. It's 12 issues, great art, and I think also this new run will have that same feeling, but it's just totally a little different. I've been excited about adding to the mythos, and I know that's every writer, so I don't get to add to this great mythology, but adding villains like Great Oscura, or defining villains like Alohar, adding new characters like Rinzana, and so many more, and really kind of adding connective tissue between a lot of the established canon makes it really fun.
I want to give some time for the asking questions. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Alex, or anything that you're curious about?
You have a Legends lore?
The question is, do you have a favorite bit of Legends lore that you got to put in or wanted to put in? I was excited that I got to use the guy. and there's some other things related to the guy that show up later in the run. That would probably be somewhat easy to figure out, but I'll let you guys read it. I like the idea of immediately after the fall of the empire and the early days of the New Republic, they're immediately challenged with something that is not a simple black and white guys, good guys. This is a complicated situation, and as the story rolls out, I think when people heard that the guys were coming back, they thought, oh, they're bad guys. And it's a little more complicated. And that's life. That's how it goes. And that's, to me, that's the fascinating stuff of the story when you get into those gray areas. Yeah, I have a short list of characters that I wish I could bring into that. Just didn't get to come out. So that's just the way it is. They're not my choice. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you like favorite piece of just Star Wars media?
What is my favorite piece of Star Wars media? I guess Empire. I think Empire, I really love sequels that go darker than the first one. And I think Empire, Godfather 2 is another great example where you're like, oh, that was a great, hopeful movie. You're like, oh damn, this is bad. I'm a big fan of the gray, kind of dark ending. I think that's fascinating. And I think it really sets up the contrast between the heroes are at the lowest they can be by the end of Empire. And when you go to Jedi, and you want that victory, you're rooting for them. And so I think sometimes media gets away from that. We're like very precious with characters. I'm not talking Star Wars, I'm just talking story. Oh, people don't want to see an unhappy story. It's like sometimes you do. Sometimes we need those to remind us that things get dark, but then they get light again.
That's often left, yes.
Yeah.
That's often left. The questions?
Yes.
Day of writing for you, what's that kind of look like, just bullet point wise?
What's an average day of writing? For me, bullet point wise, get my kids up, give them breakfast, tell them what's on the menu in the morning, get them to school, something, or take a walk, do some admin stuff. This is what you really want me in the weeds. Do the admin email stuff, and then just kind of see what's on fire. It sounds very basic, but see what is the most pressing thing I need to get done today? I tend to write my prose, my novel stuff in the evening, just because things are quieter. My inbox is quieter, my kids are quieter, and I can sit let the ideas flow, and I think you need that for prose. Comics I can do during the day because it's just much more, I hate to say it's like math, it's much more algorithmic. You get 20 pages, make a list of 1 to 20, you start listing what happens on each page, you flesh out those sentences, and it kind of builds from there. And I've written books about how to write comics, and one of the things I tell people is that the cool thing about comics is that the cool thing and sometimes the limiting thing is you can only do so much of so many things. You have 20 pages, you can only have so many panels on the page, you can only have so many actions in a panel, you can only have so many word balloons, so that doesn't make it easier, but it gives you that little comfortable blanket, and so that works better for me during the day. And, then I'll pick up my kids from school, then we have family time, dinner, and then I'll do some more work. My wife is like, you work all the time, but I love what I do, so that's the blessing. That's the secret to life, I think, is finding something for your work. If your work is something you love, then you've kind of figured it out, which is great. And so I'm lucky enough that I can get to do what I love. I get to play with characters that I love, but also create characters as well. So, and sometimes it's meetings. Some days are not as exciting as others, meetings can be fun, but I'm not always constantly just typing words. So, I think there's a gatekeeping to the idea you have to write some work today, you have to do this. You don't have to do anything if the work gets done. If you're doing the work and you're being true to yourself and meeting your deadline, however you get there, aside from using AI or plagiarizing, however it gets you there, creatively of your own mind, that's your process. And so I think everyone has a different process, and my process is different from your other writers who wake up at 5 in the morning and start writing. I just can't do that. I need to get at least 4 hours. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it sounds like writing is more complicated than just getting it in front of whatever comes to mind. There's a little more to it than that, especially in the comic industry.
Yeah, it's just what is it? It's an industry. So you kind of become a business person. I have an agent. I have a great agent. I have a team of people that help with different things, but at the end of the day, it's up to me. Coming to a convention, it's you doing promotion, writing the work, but it's also, it re-energizes you to meet fans and have conversations like this where you feel oh, people are reading this stuff. It's cool. You're not just doing it into the void. Yeah.
You still have your Star Wars toys.
Yeah.
Do you collect any more new ones?
I don't. I have an apartment in Queens, so it's space is limited. My kids have a lot of toys. My kids have their own Star Wars toys, so I kind of play with them. So it's a nice little loophole. And they should like show the kids.
Yeah, I was going to ask how your kids, are they into Star Wars?
My son loves the Jedi Academy books. He loves those books. Yeah. 9, and my sister-in-law had boxes of them, and she brought them over. She's like, "Are you gonna want these?" And he was like, "Oh, it's like Daddy's books." Like, they're different. As long as it's a different age range, but he loves those, and so he's getting them into it more. It's more about it's literally the Star Wars encyclopedia. Before Battle of Jakku, Lucas sent it over, and they're like, "You're gonna need this." I was like, "I was a fan. I know what's going on." I did not know what's going on to that level of detail, so I joked with my wife about it because I said I went into the Star Wars stuff and I'm a big fan. Now that I'm in it, I kind of feel like I've gotten a doctorate, or at least I've done a fiction writing research paper on it now. I'm thinking about, well, where is the federal sector in terms of the Star Map? Stuff like that has been really wild and really fun. It's just, I love being immersed in more. So it was really, that book was really helpful.
Is it an internal only?
No, it's out there. You too can read the encyclopedia.
I was going to ask, is it difficult being a fan of something like Star Wars and then writing? How much of it is I'm a fan, I want to see this stuff, and then also have, certain things I need to do to explore.
That's a good question. It's hard because you never want your stories to feel like fancy. I think when people read this stuff, it's probably not exactly what they expected, and that's good. Right? I want people to be surprised and feel like this. The challenge with something like Star Wars is that you know what's happening further down in the timeline. So how do you build suspense when you know will survive? So then the challenge becomes, how do I surprise the readers? How do I keep them in suspense? And how do I add to the mythos in a way that's compelling and interesting, but doesn't negate what's to come or what happened before? So there have been moments where I'm like, oh, that's cool, and I got to write that. That's cool. The first time I wrote dialogue for Darth Vader in a flashback in Battle of Jakku, the first Battle of Jakku issue, there was a backup that's Stefano Raphael. I had to stop. I was like, oh, I'm doing that. That's cool. That's neat. But I try to listen to my fan self, but not be driven by my fan self. Like, at the end of the day, it's about the craft and the writing and what's going to make the best comic under different circumstances. Lucasfilm wants different things, Marvel wants different things. We have to sell books too.
Right. That's the important part.
Yeah.
I was, may I ask you, because I've asked other Star Wars writers, how's your experience with, obviously, Marvel's publishing Star Wars comics, but Lucasfilm owns the brand.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, I don't want to say there's conflict, but is it different working with Marvel, saying different characters that they own versus Star Wars?
Having worked on the inside, at DC, I was a publicist, but I was also at Archie. I did a lot of business development and editorial, so I kind of know, I've seen how the sausage is made, and so really the difference between writing for Star Wars comics and writing for Marvel is that you just have an extra layer of notes. Story group really still gives you notes, and they know these guys are the experts. I may have my little encyclopedia, but they're in it, and they know what's coming up, and so they can kind of nudge you and tell you what to do. So it's really just an added, and I think that experience working in the industry on the business side and the editorial side has hopefully made me easier to deal with, and that I get it. I'm borrowing these stories. This is the story I want to tell, but maybe I can't tell it that way because of other factors that I'm not privy to, and that's the business.
I was going to ask, there's things that might be government that you're not privy to, not aware of.
I mean, there are times when they'll say, yeah, we can't do that because of other stuff. They won't say it because of this thing that's coming up.
Right.
Because sometimes you don't know, or they just flag something for something else. And I find that useful. It's okay, well, I know that's off limits, so I'll do something else. But there's just so much to cover. When they say you can't deal with this character, it's usually not disappointing because there's so many amazing things to play with.
Right.
Yeah. And one thing I really love to do is pull out a deep cut so deep that even they are oh, okay, that's a neat one. In issue 2, Luke lands on this planet and he discovers this Jedi artifact, the Crown of Verity. It's not a big spoiler, she's been out for a little bit. And I put that in the strip, and the story group was oh, that's a nice one. Nice pull. And so I was good job. And then the same thing with Adelhard, who I think was a very kind of forgotten villain, just from this game that came out and was popular, but had, wasn't really discussed. And so to pull him out and weave him into Jakku, and really what I wanted to do with Jakku is recontextualize how you experience that moment. Because when you read the Aftermath novels, the core 3 aren't really part of it, Luke, Leia, and Han. And so it's what were they doing? And so this answers that. And that's a big question to answer, I felt. And so I felt a great responsibility to make it feel important.
Yeah. That's a big piece that was missing. People wondering where they were.
Yeah, now we know.
You get to tell the story. That's pretty cool. Are there, there's this thing we talked about, you being privy to things. Has ever been something that you wanted to include maybe in a Star Wars work, and then it came up later down the line, like, oh, that's why I couldn't use that.
No, I mean, I'm sure there has been, but I'm usually not, I wouldn't think about it in those terms, like they own these characters, they can stagger them as they see fit. I'm a fan too, so it's kind of cool, like, oh, they did do something with so-and-so or whatever. I don't keep like a bad. Any other questions? Yeah, what am I currently working on Star Wars wise? I'm writing Dick Tracy for Matthew, which is and it's co-written with Michael Moreci, and he and I just launched a new vertical scroll strip for Kate Beecher's The Phantom 2040. So Geraldo Borges draws Dick Tracy, John Moore is drawing Phantom 2040. What else am I working on? Just a bunch of other stuff.
Even a new #1 came out this week.
Yeah, The Dusk, which is from Amp Comics. They have an improvement called Cheese Con, which is focusing on Latinx creators. So The Dusk was a Kickstarter I did years ago. It was basically me trying to do an all ages Batman type character, like a comic I can hand to my son and not be worried about too much violence, but also this idea of like, I'm just gonna punch him and throw him in jail and it's problem solved. Like, how do I message that to a younger reader in showing something that's complicated but kind of boiled down in a way that a younger reader can digest and drawn in a welcoming kind of all ages style, but still interesting to a reader like me, a 40-something who's a fan of Batman and can appreciate the stuff. And so the Kickstarter, we did that, and then Cheeseburger reached out. They were like, "Would you want us to put these out as like monthlies?" And the hope is that if these do well, we'll be able to do some more. That's right. Yeah, I'm writing a Daredevil crime novel for Marvel Press, Hickory Avenue, and it's not in the universe of the TV show, but it's very much in the same vibe, like very gritty adult. And no prize to anyone who reads it and figures out where in the Daredevil canon it fits, because it's got, I think it's got a little bit of everything. It's definitely a love letter to the Daredevil comics I grew up with, like Last Rites and kind of the Chichester Lee Weeks era. But also, I'm a big Daredevil fan. I think I've read every Daredevil issue at least once, and I also got to write the illustrated history of Daredevil for Insight, which is coming out in November. Yeah, cool. Very Daredevil heavy stretch. Nice. Yeah.
Did you see the brand wool here?
I did. I got to meet her. Yeah, that was really cool. I got to post about it. I was like, I met her, Kim Page. Okay, I did not tell her that. I mean, it's more in tune with the comic book continuities. Yeah. I'll be at my table a little while more if you guys want to pick up some books and get them signed. I have to catch a flight soon, but I'll be there for a little bit. Thanks again.
I have a Star Wars YouTube channel and podcast, Nick and Mel's Hyperspace, if y'all want to check them out. Feel free. I didn't bring any parts. I totally forgot. Didn't realize that when I got here, but feel free to check me out. I can send you a link if you're interested. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.